Again, welcome. My name is Paras Vivo. I've been with Amazon for a little over 6 years. I'm currently a senior solutions architect, and I work with all enterprise customers to migrate in mass to AWS. Right. So part of my and it's mostly North America, U.S., Canada, and a little bit of Mexico and APAC. Sometimes APAC as well. Right. So today I have now this topic is about moving from a monolith to modern apps. Right. What's the best practices? What should we be looking for? How many of you in the audience like code? Should we dive in to code? All right, let's do that. Right. Later in my presentation. Today I have Tom Leshowski. Tom leads our enterprise technology team, senior leader at Amazon. He's been here a long time. And I have Chris from Fender, one of our favorite customers, awesome guitars that I still can't figure out how to play. So I'm going to need to take some lessons, Chris, when I get back to Seattle. So he'll speak about what Fender is doing, what Fender has done to move from a monolithic to a microservice. Really cool use case. I'm really excited that Chris is here with us today. Right? So this is the last session, so obviously it's a little dated. So we'll go directly into the agenda. We'll talk about the Serverless Advantage. Tom will come and talk about the trends in the enterprise that he sees. We'll jump into a real-time scenario, and I'm going to need all of your help. We are going to do a joint exercise together, and then we are going to jump into architecture. We're going to jump into code. We'll talk about security. We'll talk about cost, all those good things, right? Right after that, we'll have Chris come over and talk to us about their journey using microservices and serverless services, right? And then I'll leave you with a modern application checklist, and we'll do Q&A, right? So let's talk about the Serverless Advantage, right? And I'm going to go through these fast. I'm assuming most of you have been with Amazon AWS for a while, so I'm obviously not going to go into the one-on-one level basic stuff, right? So anytime we build services, we always think about core tenants from what is this going to give for our customers, right? How can we reduce their operational burden anytime we build a service? So with serverless, we have 4 key tenants. The first one, obviously, is no provisioning, no management, and maybe a little bit of management to the level of your business logic, right? Second one is automatically scaling. As your application needs grow, the serverless environment, your serverless application needs to support it. You're paying for value, so anytime you're not using it, obviously you're not getting charged for it. And if you know AWS, since you've been with us, security is job zero. And as you know, we operate under a shared responsibility model, right? Which means that we take care of certain parts of all the infrastructure. You are responsible for taking care of your application security. And with serverless, we look to move that needle higher, wherein for example, you don't have to take care of any of the patching on your operating systems, right? So those are some areas where we really focus hard to remove the operational burden away from you guys. And because of that, we are able to give, agility is something that we've spoken from day one, right? From our very first reInvent, Andy Jassy, our CEO, always talks about providing agility to our customers, right? And serverless really enables that, to a much higher degree. Same thing with Elasticity. I spoke a little bit about it, right? Your applications need to be elastic enough so they can withstand any large, influx of traffic. And once you do that, your total cost of efficiency, the value you get out of it is a lot higher, which basically means that you can now start to focus 90% of your time building, features and releasing things that your customers want, and focus a very small percentage of your time on the infrastructure. And this infrastructure is really meant to be to a level where it's aligned to your business logic, right? So till today, I've never seen a company that's differentiated based on how well they manage their infrastructure, right? We always see companies, enterprises standing up for what they do best for their customers. So that's the real differentiator that you bring in. The serverless portfolio is fairly large. It's gotten larger after Werner's and Andy's announcements from the last couple of days. But at the core, the way we look at it is we've got these application primitives, which are compute and data stores, right? So we've got S3, Lambda, Fargate, DynamoDB, which is our NoSQL database, right? You got Amazon Aurora serverless, right? So you can run it really in a serverless fashion. And obviously, you got Kinesis. On the application integration side, you got SNS, step functions, API gateway. And API gateway is really the heart of your, it's really your front door to all your application logic in the back. Then you've got the developer tools. You want to obviously manage everything with code. There's no going in manually. We don't recommend you go manually into the console, do stuff unless you're learning. In a production environment, you should really be managing using CloudFormation or SAM in a serverless model, right? And security, as you said, job zero. So obviously, we've got IAM, SSO, single sign-on, inspector, VPC, which most of you are familiar with, AWS Shield and Cognito, right? So fairly broad set of services that we've got in the serverless space, and it's continuing to grow. And we can't wait to see all the great stuff you guys are going to do over the next year, before we get back for reInvent with all the new services and all the new features that we've announced, right? With that being said, I'd like to welcome Tom Leshevsky to walk us through the trends in the enterprise. Tom, please.
Thanks, Paras.
Yep.
All right, as Paras mentioned, I'm an enterprise technologist. What that means is I visit with a lot of our large enterprise customers, including new age enterprise customers like Salesforce, Dropbox, and some of the other customers like Capital One, Liberty Mutual, Mass Mutual, and help them with their cloud strategy and help them figure out how they're going to move to AWS. I think a lot of these customers have taken an approach of what I call lift and forget, not lift and shift. Some people call it rehost, is that they put these things over, they do EC2, they do EBS volumes, they maybe use a little bit of S3, which is sort of serverless. But now they're asking me, a lot of these companies are asking me now is, Tom, I want to take advantage of microservices, I want to take advantage of Lambda, I want to take advantage of Elasticsearch, Redshift, DynamoDB, some of those other services, and how do I do that? Because I have these large monolithic applications, right? And so one of the great things about AWS and what's happening with the cloud is innovation is accelerating, right? We had Kubernetes and containers, and now we have serverless with Lambda. So one of the questions I get there is, what should I move to containers in Kubernetes, and when could I move it to serverless? So I just wanted to point out a few of the guidances that I give to people. One of the things you have to remember with Lambda is it supports a certain number of languages, right? So it supports Go and .NET and C#. So if a language is an older language, like maybe you have a PHP app, that's not suitable. I also look at asynchronous communication. There is a 15-minute timeout with Lambda. So if it's something that requires a quick response or something that requires some latency, and Fender will talk about how they have some latency concerns with going to SAP and some back-end systems. If you have to wait a long time and don't know when that response is going to come back, perhaps Lambda isn't a good thing to use. The other thing I also look at is if you're working in a hybrid cloud or multi-cloud environment, right? Perhaps Kubernetes would be a better choice. Containers would be a better choice, something like Docker, to run that, because you need to deploy to different platforms. In fact, I don't know if you saw, we announced with Cisco recently an announcement about how you can deploy Kubernetes using Cisco on-premises as well as onto AWS. IBM has a similar offering as well. Also look at session state and how stateful this application is. Do I need to store state? I mean, Lambda is more made for stateless type applications. And what I also recommend, because some companies look at me and they go, yeah, I have a good handle on what I have, and I got this spreadsheet, and I talked to some of the app developers, and I think I can figure out what to move to which, and maybe what to keep on EC2. We're working with Dynatrace. If people are familiar with that, APM tools. There's also APM tools from AppDynamics and New Relic. And they're expanding those tools in order to take a look at what you have and give you recommendations. Particularly Dynatrace does this. It gives you recommendations on what you might keep in a big monolithic EC2 application, because there's nothing wrong with doing that. If you have a huge daemon that's just sitting there listening for a lot of traffic and you just don't want to fire and forget, you might want to keep it on EC2. It makes recommendations on maybe what to move to microservices and containers and what to move to serverless. So I do recommend taking a look at a tool. A tool is not the holy grail, right? But it does help you to do that automatic analysis of what my platform is and what makes sense to move into serverless or containers. So there's a lot of different use cases. Now, the most simplest use case, right, and it's very simple, is I could run a website, totally static website on S3. Whew, that's pretty cool. Another one, moving to a little bit more aggressive, is Cox Automotive. They own Kelley Blue Book. They have a monolithic application that they're using the strangler pattern with. So they're slowly taking a look at functions within that monolithic application and moving them to serverless. They're moving them to Lambda. And Fender is doing a very similar thing as well. It's just not, hey, I'm going to move everything to Lambda services all at once. A more aggressive example, which is actually a pilot, and are people familiar with This Is My Architecture? I'm always amazed that, well, we got a few heads nodding, but This Is My Architecture is really good. It's a 10-minute quick video. You can get an example of different architectures. And I like to use the example of Nordstrom's because they're in the retail space. And they created an application called Hello Retail. And it is a pilot, but it's a fully serverless application. So what it does, it uses API gateway and Lambda functions in order to execute a full retail website. All right, so it is possible to do, but remember that's a pilot example. The other side of the equation where I see a lot of people moving to serverless is on the operations side. If you take a look at autonomous IT. Also available on This Is My Architecture is one of our partners, Accenture, has Accenture Cloud Platform, which is like a cloud management, cloud operation platform that is completely serverless running on AWS. Now, how this works is CloudWatch, Lambda functions are triggered off, right? A lot of that information is stored into S3. Other Lambda functions then pick up that monitoring and management and change management information, and they store it into Elasticsearch, and then you can then take a look at what your platform is and the changes that are happening in your platform. Another example is, and I'm going to talk about another example about Capital One. Capital One has something called Cloud Custodian, which is also, if you take a look at This Is My Architecture, they go into detail on now how they also use CloudWatch and Lambda to do automatic governance and code and compliance as code, using, once again, Lambda functions, storing stuff into S3. The other example I just want to give real quick is, if you haven't heard of it, has anyone heard of Wild Rides? All right, this is something available from AWS. It's a 2-day workshop where it shows you how to develop a DevOps environment using serverless. So you can request this from your account manager or from whoever you work with at AWS. 2-day workshop shows you how to do DevOps in a completely serverless environment. So Thompson Reuters, they're a large company. I would consider a software vendor, right? They have hundreds of applications that they support. They wanted to know how they could improve the user experience for their customers. So what they use here, I talked a lot about API Gateway, I talked about Lambdas. They actually use Kinesis and Kinesis Firehose to put information into S3, use Lambda functions to pull that information out of S3, and also use Elasticsearch, just like the ACP Accenture example, and Cabana, which is an open source BI tool, in order to gain insights and improve the product experience for their customers. Completely serverless. FINRA, I think a lot of people have heard about FINRA. Well, they process, and everyone hears about FINRA, I think, that heard about FINRA, is they're looking at fraud, right? They're looking at fraud in the securities industry. We always hear about the piece that they run EMR, but what we often don't talk about is the fact that they use FTP to put stuff into S3 and then have a Lambda function that then picks up that information and then stores it into EMR. So you could look at that as like an ETL process. So you don't have to use like a third party, don't have to have licensing in order to support some kind of ETL process to then look at information process it in EMR, and look for fraud detection. Hearst is another example using Kinesis and using EMR as well. What they do as well is that what Hearst is trying to do is do quick stream analysis, right? And you can buy products in order to do click stream analysis, right? But they're using, once again, Kinesis Firehose into S3, Lambda functions into EMR in order to do that. And then Vivo, they're a video hosting service. Now, they had a legacy monolithic application. It was written in .NET, and they moved it over into Lambda and DynamoDB. And then Expedia. The one thing I do want to emphasize with Expedia is that when you think of Expedia, you think of a big website, right, that has a lot of transactions. Expedia, in this case, the serverless case, is not moving their entire application, their website, onto AWS. If you looked at my use cases I had in my other slide, one of the use cases was operations. So once again, just like Accenture ACP is using it for their back-end operations, they're using it with CloudWatch and CloudTrail, Lambda functions, storing things in X3, doing analysis on their operating environment. They're also using it for CI/CD, which is a common use case, right? So your CI/CD pipeline can all be functioning using S3, using Lambda behind the scenes. They also have, if you take a look at, Expedia's got some websites, they have like 6 different use cases that they're using it for. They're also using it for testing. So when they do testing, they're firing off Lambda functions and then storing the information into S3 buckets and doing some analysis on it. The last example I want to talk about is Capital One. And the reason I like this example is I gave you some, .NET is sort of a legacy application, if you will, but this is actually in a mainframe situation. So they were on mainframe DB2, and they wanted to go, if you take a look at the Capital One story, they wanted to do digital transformation. They wanted to offer mobile banking. Well, it's very expensive to do mobile banking when you're talking back to a mainframe. Very costly. So what they did, and once again, don't be afraid of FTP, could be your friend. They use FTP to put this into an S3 bucket, and then they take Lambda functions, store it into 3 different sources. They store the transactional data into DynamoDB, because that's the best thing in order to mobile enable their application. So their mobile app talks to DynamoDB. But then they also have batch jobs, which are triggered by Lambda, but these batch jobs are running in EC2. Remember when I talked about some cases, it's just like EC2 is maybe the best choice to run things. And those batch jobs load data into Redshift, and then they have another set of Lambda functions that pull that data into RDS. So just want to emphasize that there's not one choice for your database. You can have multiple different types of database for multiple different types of users. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Paras, and he's going to get us some details on how you can actually code Lambda functions, right?
Yep, sure. Thank you, Tom. That was very helpful. All right, get this thing set up. So I have a, let's dive into a scenario, right? All right. So, can you switch it? Yeah, thank you, Zach. So let's dive into a scenario, right? So I'm sure you've read the abstract for this talk, right? So here's a typical team consisting of developers, architects, business analysts, and a program manager. They have a new project to survey their customers on some new features that they're going to release in the market, and they want to find out if this is something that will resonate with them or not, right? This team is already burdened with their current portfolio of apps where it's all monolithic, and there's a lot of infrastructure-related work that they have to do to keep those apps going. This team has been playing with the idea of serverless. They've been thinking, well, this is so easy to do, and, so we must be doing something wrong, right? It turns out it's not. They're not doing anything wrong. It is actually easy to get a serverless environment spin up. It's literally writing Lambda code, connecting to your API gateway and so on, right? Which we'll talk about. Team gets together. They decide, we're going to build we're going to use serverless services to build this new app. And obviously, right, however, they need to justify this choice to their finance and their security teams, right? So the core reason behind going this way is so they could reduce their undifferentiated heavy lifting. You've heard Andy and our leaders talk about the undifferentiated heavy lifting that we want to take away from our customers so they could focus more on their business logic. So the same, thought process over here as well. So let's dive right into their new project, right? So it's a polling web app. Users across the US and Canada. Poll will run over 2 days. Expected traffic is about 10 million, which means you really need to design for 5K concurrency. Users will be sent a link to the survey, so they don't have to use Google or Facebook or anything to log into in order to gain access to the survey. Cost control is extremely critical. HA is important, and obviously it needs to be resilient, right? Poll may be run multiple times a year, right? And at some point, this team also wants to provide it to other enterprises as a SaaS offering. Page load times are extremely critical because most people are going to be using their mobile phones, and we know the drop rate, right? If it goes beyond a certain time, people just lose interest and they'll walk away. So this is the most important thing, though. The team has only 2 weeks to design, build, test and deploy production. So extremely short timeline in which they have to get this done, right? So the team decided to build a modern app, right? As I said, let's look at some of the capabilities of a modern app, right? The first thing is security. You have to build and think about security at every single layer that you build your app with, right? It shouldn't be just restricted to one layer. You should always think about every layer. Where anyhow, in any way that you can build security for every layer, that's better from a security perspective. Resilient, it needs to be resilient, so it needs to be up 24/7. It needs to be elastic, which really means it needs to expand when there are more users. It needs to automatically go down when there are not many users. It needs to be modular, so this way your CI/CD, your development velocity is a lot higher, right? It needs to be automated. Nobody wants to do manual check-in, and Tom talked about a lot of these teams having different skill sets, right? Some may have .NET, some folks may have Python, Node, some may have Java, right? So they need to be able to make it interoperable, right? So it's really important. So before we dive into the outcome of the project, and that's where I'll need all of your help, right? We're going to actually go and do the poll. Let's look at some of the learnings that were applied, after the project was completed, that were applied organizational-wide. And these are really your best practices on how you should be thinking about building microservices into a serverless model, right? Using a serverless model. So first one is think big, but act small, right? You always want to have the big vision of converting your entire your monolithic application into a microservices model, but then you want to start small, right? And Fender will talk a little bit about their journey and how they started. Obviously you want to have your cloud dev environment set up. Integration testing is very important. Automation is important. Initial focus is on thin, less robust versions of these microservices. And I've seen a lot of teams get stuck with the notion of high SLAs. Start with a reasonable bar, and then continue to increase the level of service that you want to provide, right? So over time, once you've got the service, once you've got the key elements nailed in, start to then focus really on improving the performance, right? Second one is really inspecting and adapting, right? And if you've heard some of the Amazon.com talks, you've heard about these two pizza teams, right? So these teams basically own the service end to end, right? So they design, they build, they deploy, they support, and they maintain it, right? What that means is nobody writes bad code, right? Because in the old world, there used to be always this transition between this, the dev team and the support team, where you've got 2-week transition periods, and you're always, working out a project schedule on when the exact handoff is, right? With when a team owns the entire service, they're a lot more they get a lot more better at it, right? Because these guys are the guys that built the service, so they can start to figure out what patterns they're seeing and continue to fix it, right? So that's what the service ownership is. Continuously, challenge yourself. Is this the right? Is this small enough, or do we need to break this up? Right? Again, comes back to the 2 pizza teams. The simple logic is if you can't feed your team in 2 pizzas, you got to break it. Right? That's the simple logic, right, that we use. So, continuously challenge the service decomposition model. If you need to decompose it further, try to align it to your business objectives, right? So these are some guiding principles. Obviously, the first one is don't boil the ocean, don't go crazy, right? Start small, think big, but start small. Monitoring and management is fundamental because, once, make sure that all your teams agree to one common monitoring and management solution, because that way you can start to now look at patterns and continuously improve on those areas that you need to improve, right? And there are best practices that come out of it, right? Some teams might have a better performance, some teams might have a better response, response rates and whatnot, right? So, you want to continuously think about that and make sure that every team is using the same monitoring and, management solution out there, right? Stay true to SOA concepts, obviously, right? And the fundamental goal is always, to achieve more agility, right? And then the next one is, building security in every layer, right, and leveraging different storage options. When you're building a whole, large team of microservices, right, every team has different requirements. So enable these teams to make decisions on their own. Some teams might need S3, some teams will need RDS, some teams might need, DynamoDB, and some teams might need, Postgres, right, for example. So, give the authority to the teams on what they want to do, how they want to build their service to maintain the high bar for their customers, right? So with that being said, let's jump into a demo. I'd like your help. So if you could all, please, go to this using your mobile phones or your tablets or your laptops, go to this website called clouddemo.xyz. And Zach, if you could please switch it. Thank you. All right, I'm going to do the same thing. Nope. I'll do that. All right. Let's give it about, 30 seconds or so for everybody to log their votes in. And meanwhile, we should see this number go up gradually. Sweet. Okay. 15 more seconds, and then we'll get started. 60. So we're surveying this room on what they think right now. So it's going to be an interesting find. So we got about 150 or so. I think we'll start, right? So how energized are you feeling? There's a reason why I put 10, 9, and 8, and why you did not see a 1. You're at reInvent, you're at Las Vegas, you have a party coming up, so you have to feel at least great, right? So it's a fair question, right? The second one was, if you know people, I know the person on my left, I know the person on my right, I know person on both sides of me. I picked the people on both sides of me. That's only 26%. So, if this is a great opportunity to know, the people on either side, right? The third one, classic Christmas song. I absolutely don't blame you. I completely agree with you. My daughter is the same. This is what plays at home during Christmas time. And I've seen this. This is the third repeat, and this continues to be the most favorite song, right, for Christmas. And which superpower do you have? 37% of you. I'd love to meet with you offline. Once we are done with the session, I'd love to learn about what your superpower is, and that way I can learn something from you guys, right? So, if you were to have a superpower, please hit me up right after this one, right? All right. That was good exercise. So this is what the team built. And in reality, this is really a JSON document, right? So you can go in and literally change this. I'll walk you through the code as well. This is the Cognito ID. These are the questions, so you can, it's basically so configurable, they could easily roll it out as a SaaS solution. With that, Zach, if you could help switch over to the presentation. Thank you. Thank you, Zach. All right, so let's look at the final production architecture, right? So you have your browser. The DNS is hosted on Route 53. This is what I call a static layer. All my code and the assets and the pictures and whatnot, right? Everything is hosted on S3. I've enabled bucket policies on S3 to make sure that only CloudFront is able to access it. So that way, if you try to hit the S3 page directly, S3 site directly, it's going to say access denied. And we're doing this not just from a security perspective, but also from a cost perspective. And you're serving these pages to the user via Amazon CloudFront. So I've enabled origin access identity, right, which is what enables you, which is what gives you that functionality. And then I have these are some other features that you could use. If you want to restrict to a specific country, you could use, geo restrictions. You could use sign cookies in case your application needs to carry over from one page to the other. If you want to share it with a very small group of people, then you could use signed URLs. And obviously, by having it on CloudFront, we provide a lot of DDoS support for you, right? So if you notice, you did not have to, log in with your Facebook ID or with you didn't have to do any of that, right? You basically hit it and it worked. And now, if you try to refresh it, if some of you are curious, try to refresh go to clouddemo.xyz, try to vote again, you will not be able to do it. And the reason for that is we are using an unauthenticated ID that's generated from Cognito, and we are using that unauthenticated ID to get into Amazon API Gateway, assume a role, right? We're assuming a role, getting into API Gateway, which is basically calling a Lambda function, and that's getting stored in DynamoDB. However, right, let's say you're running this across, in this case, we're running it across millions of users, right? Now, let's say this is a presidential poll, for example, and one candidate, for whatsoever reason, is just famous, right? What you could run into hotkey issues, right? Wherein and it's a deeper concept. We can talk about that offline if you want to learn more about it. But hotkey is basically when one partition gets overloaded, and then you have problems with the read and write, right? So in order to avoid that, I'm using DynamoDB streams, which is basically subscribed to a Lambda function is subscribed to the DynamoDB stream, and it's taking it and putting the aggregate in another DynamoDB table, right? So all this will make a lot more sense in the next 5 minutes. Let's jump into the code. I'll show you how it works. We'll come back. We'll talk about the cost aspects and the security aspects. So Zach, I'm going to need your help again. Thank you, Zach. All right. So first, let's start with if you looked at our architecture, right? So here's the architecture. So we'll go back and forth so you can understand it even better, right? So let's look at S3 first, so that you can see the policy that I've put in. Right, so that's the bucket. So if you see the permissions, and if you see the bucket policy, you're basically enabling the, can you all see? All right, maybe this is better, right? So this is where we've enabled OAI, right? So, and the bucket, literally has all the code, right? So now let's look at, so if you go back to let's look at our CloudFront distribution. Right, so here's my distribution. I'm using all edge locations for best performance. And if you look at the behavior, right, so if I typed in http://demo, no, it's clouddemo.xyz, you'll see that it redirects me to HTTPS. And that's happening because we basically told CloudFront, redirect any HTTP request and send it to an HTTPS page, right? So that's CloudFront. As you can see, it's all simple code, right? There's no, there's not. It's basically simple configuration, not a lot of code, right? So that said, let's look at our API, right? Right here, if we go back to the architecture, I'll show you Cognito quickly as well, right? Cognito. It's an identity pool, and we are basically using an unauthenticated ID, right? So as you can see, the request pattern, right? It's consistently up because we've been doing these talks for the last 3 days. That's why it's consistently up, right? Let's look at our API gateway. And this is where I'll show you the two functions that we are calling, Lambda functions that we are calling. So if I look at my post, this is where you post it, right, into DynamoDB. And all it's doing, it's calling this function called cast vote. So it's calling a Lambda function, which is cast vote. And if you look at the get, which is basically at the time, for the results page, the page that you saw with all the pie charts, it's basically packaging it up. It's all getting packaged up and being sent back to sent back as a JSON, right? So this is the vote tally response, right? So let's look at the DynamoDB tables first, and then we'll go to the Lambda function. So that way, it's easier for you all to understand. So here's the vote table. This is where all the individual votes are being stored. So this is one of the records, right? And let's just look at it a simple view. Here you go. So this is basically question 1. This is the option the user selected. Question 2, so on. And this is very important, right? This is basically time to live. At all times, right? You want to make sure that your DynamoDB table doesn't become too huge because there is storage cost involved, right? So you want to keep it to a minimal. So in this case, once you set a time to live attribute on every record, you can basically tell DynamoDB, I want you to delete this record automatically in 24 hours, right? And that's what this attribute is doing right here. So let me show you when this thing is going to expire. I think it's 20. I think I set it to 24 hours. Right here, right? So you can see that this thing is going to expire UTC time, right? So it's 24 hours basically. And so that's the first table, right? So that table will continue to get populated. And the event you need to do, you need to run analytics on top of it. The best option is to move it, into Redshift via S3 or something like that, right? So that way you still have the data in the event. There is the need to do further analyses on what happened, right? So here's the second DynamoDB table, right? And this basically has only 12 records. So we had 4 questions. We had 3 options for each. So that's 12 records. And all this is doing is, it's a +1, right? And I'm sure one of this is the superpower. I can't figure out which one it is, but we'll get to that, right? So, so if I go let's look at the Lambda function, right? The first Lambda function that's taking your vote. So I'm talking about this one, right? That's taking in your vote and putting it in the first DynamoDB table. So here's the cast vote function. We looked at the API gateway, and all this is, it's a really simple Lambda function written in Python. And if you look at this, right, in the old world, if you had to make sure that one user doesn't vote twice, you basically have to make a call to the database if it already exists. If it doesn't exist, then you insert, right? That's usually how it happens. With DynamoDB over here, what I'm doing is really simple. I'm using a attribute that's available in the DynamoDB APIs, right? I'm basically using the same attribute, so that way I don't even have to, make all these calls, right? So here's my put item, right? I initialize the table right here, vote_table, right? And here is this is the TTL, right? This is where the TTL is happening, right? And this is the condition expression, right, that I'm using. So that's the first Lambda function. Let's look at the second function, which is vote aggregator. And this is where it's basically doing a +1. So it's subscribed to the stream, and all it's doing is a update item, right? And if you see the triggers over here, if you're looking at this trigger, right? So that's basically the stream that it's subscribed to, right? So that's the demo right there. Zach, if I could switch back, please. Switch back to the presentation. Oh, thank you, Zach. Yeah. So now let's talk a little bit about the cost aspect, right? The first thing, this is all serverless. So obviously, you're not paying for anything at the time you're not using, except for S3, which is really minimal cost, right? The second one, From a cost perspective, again, comes down to DynamoDB, right, where we talked about the TTL function and how you continue to keep the DynamoDB table as slim as you need to. And obviously with all the other components, you're not paying till you invoke that service, right? So from a security aspect, if you look at it, right, S3 is already secured because we've got the OAI policy, bucket policy in there. CloudFront provides a lot of the DDoS support. Cognito, we are using the unauthenticated ID to gain IAM credentials to move forward in the process. And we are using ACM, which is free, right? So that's why this HTTP basically certificate manager, it's free. So that way, this is how you would, think about modeling from a cost perspective, from an architecture perspective. And as you can see, most of what we did, what I showed you, is really configuration and not that much code, right? We literally load 2 Lambda functions, right? We load a bucket policy, and there you go, right? So imagine what happens to your development velocity if you continue to build on serverless, right? It's a great way to increase the amount of features you're going to develop to your customers. So that way, it's good from all perspectives, right? With that said, I'd like to welcome Chris Ingram from Fender to help us through, to talk to us about their journey. Here, take it forward, Chris. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Brad.
All right, your water.
All right, so Chris Ingram, Vice President of IT at Fender Musical e-commerce business. The journey I'd like to talk with you about today was our move from a packaged monolithic e-commerce system we were running on ATG over to a custom-built solution that we're running on the cloud now in partnership with Amazon. First, just a couple quick notes about Fender. I think probably everybody's a little bit familiar with Fender, especially if you went to the keynote speech today. You've probably seen them on stage. Everybody from Bruno Mars, Brad Paisley, Flea, you definitely heard them with Eric Clapton. But the company was started by Leo Fender over 70 years ago. He believed in using building blocks and talking with his musicians and looking for ways to improve on the instruments. He was a problem solver. All right, are we?
I'll be a clicker.
Okay, go for it. So Leo invented 3 major instruments that revolutionized the industry. The first one, the Telecaster, followed by the precision bass, both in 1951. Then based on his ongoing feedback with his musicians, he created the Stratocaster in 1954. And you can actually go to a dealer store and buy versions of all 3 of these today. If you fast forward 70 years, Fender now has over 2,000 employees across the world. We have headquarter locations in Scottsdale, Arizona, London, and Tokyo. And we now sell over 2,000 SKUs. We operate a global network of dealers and distributors across more than 50 countries. See, obviously we sell direct throughout the States and Europe, and then a lot of countries in Asia, we operate on one distributor model. So 98% of all of our business is conducted with this network. So about in 2009, we had prior to that, we had historically only been servicing our dealers with field sales and inside sales personnel. But in 2009, we decided to launch an e-commerce system. So like many companies do, we went out and we acquired licenses for the system. We spent countless days and months customizing that, and then we launched on physical servers inside our data center in Boston. And then as part of a data center consolidation project, we actually moved those servers over to our data center in Scottsdale. Physically, we relocated them from Boston all the way over to Arizona. And then we virtualized those inside our Scottsdale data center. So the system we created, it's called, okay. So we created this monolithic architecture that we called FMIC Direct. So followed a pretty much standard architecture, user activity going through a firewall, load balanced across Apache servers, ATG being the core e-commerce system, running its own SQL server and SAN system. We had actually ripped out the built-in search function and replaced that with Solar to give us additional flexibility and benefits. And then we directly coupled the system to our 2 ERP systems. So for the Americas and Asia, we run SAP, and in Europe, we run an AS400 system. Overall, the system worked well for a while for us, but over time, we were encountering more and more issues with our ability to scale. We didn't have a building blocks design where we could take out one component and replace it with something better. We weren't able to scale when we wanted to expand into Europe and Asia. Good. A few examples of what this looked like. This is just the homepage of the old FMIC Direct site. Please keep in mind it was designed in 2009, so it will have a little bit of a dated look and feel here. One of our main issues was just the performance of the site. It could take more than 10 seconds just to reach that login page. On the product search page here, so we were limited to a single product image. That's all we could get. We were running a PIM system which had all of the images that we would use on our consumer sites, but we weren't able to integrate that with our e-commerce system. So imagine we had to tell our dealers, hey, if you want to see all those nice images and the back shot and the close-up of the pickups, you need to go to the consumer site. You know, we're asking you to sell our products, but then we're telling you to go to the consumer site. Didn't make a lot of sense. And then certain things were just painful. One of the most used features of the site was our search, where's my order page? And we made dealers go through multiple menus just to get to this. You know, so if you imagine some dealers in the store, they don't necessarily care about what the products are. They're not in charge of ordering. They just want to receive an order. But we made them go through the full suite of the sales functionality first. So that led us to wanting to develop a new business case. We wanted a brand new approach. We didn't want to try to update the old version. We just wanted to start over from scratch. So first item was to focus on cost savings. So by moving to the cloud, we would get rid of all of our hardware costs, maintenance, and data center expenses. By custom building it, we would avoid the need for any software licenses and annual maintenance expense. On employee productivity, the old site was focused so much on our dealers and distributors that there wasn't a lot in that for our internal teams. So our field teams, our customer service teams, they would ask, hey, can you do this, this, or this for me? And say, yeah, we kind of can't. We're locked into how this works as a sales-first system. And then we wanted to move to a DevOps model and give our development team more skills and continue their learning and their career paths. Under operational improvements, we wanted to reduce the downtime that we were suffering. We no longer wanted to have to schedule Saturday night deployments and stay up all night when they didn't work perfectly, and involving our infrastructure teams and development teams and QA teams. But then last, also on business agility, this was really my biggest thing. I wanted to move from offering a glorified order entry system to our dealers to really be more of a suite of tools and services that we can make available to them that would make it easier for them to run their businesses and easier to do business with Fender. So skipping ahead a little bit, our business case was approved. We started down the journey. One of the first things we had to figure out was how were we going to load our data? So for this, we did 3 different approaches. The first one on product info. So we would extract all of our core manufacturing master data from both ERP systems and load those into a new PIM system, which we selected Enterworks for. And then inside Enterworks, we loaded all of the images. So all of those, the front, the back, the detail shots, all of those went in there, and we uploaded those to Amazon CloudFront. All the data gets sent to S3, and then via Lambda function, we load into Dynamo, and then index into Elastic. The second one, order info, just a little bit different. We extract out of ERP systems, load to S3, then we have a Lambda function to load to Dynamo, and then we use an EC2 for Dynamo streams and index into Elastic. The third one, inventory. We extract inventory information every 30 minutes from both ERP systems, load it into S3 and the Lambda function. Here we use Redis, just for faster retrieval processing, and again, index into Elastic. And the inventory one, we're also able to use for our B2C sites, as well as some internal applications. For the site architecture, I'm going to go through this. This is going to be our current state, but when we first started our migration, we were completely EC2. You'll see here that we've actually replaced some of those EC2 instances now with Lambda functions. Static content all hosted on CloudFront. User activity routed through a classic load balancer to the core system, which is all built on Angular and Node. Elasticache we use for session management. The Postgres database is for all of our key dealer information. And then the first 2 Lambda functions running inside of our VPC are for order creation and invoices, because those go through our direct connect to our ERP systems. We really tried to minimize the amount of information that had to go directly to the ERP systems, but we wanted to make sure that order creation invoices didn't have any problems. So we made that exception there. And then the next three, so online payments, warranty claims, and finance details, that activity is routed through the API gateway, and then they each call their own subsequent services. And last one on there, we use Amazon SES for all of our email management, including order confirmation emails and support ticket creation. So much more of this building blocks approach that we were going with here. And you can see we've already replaced those 5 services with Lambda functions, and as we make improvements to other functions, we ask first, should we move that to a Lambda function also? So a few shots of the new modern dealer portal. Hopefully you can see a little bit of improvement from a visual layer from what the previous one looked like in 2009. This homepage is now completely customizable for any user. So now if I'm that user working in the warehouse and in charge of receiving, I can take that recent shipments widget and drag that to the top of my page, and I can close out the finance one or the bulk order one. I don't need to see those from my role, so I can have a cleaner desktop. If I am in the finance department, I can put the open invoices in the top center. This becomes important because we persist this over to any mobile device or any other device that the user chooses. So they only have to customize that homepage once, and it persists to all other devices that they use. The new search results page, we've tried to make all content available at a single glance to our users. So they have all the facets that you would be used to. You can see all of the color options available in the family, including whether it's in stock, pricing, when it's expected to be back available, and the kind of the core product description. One thing to note here, if you look in the top right, there's that customer view button. This was one of the things that came from a kind of late dealer feedback. Users would tell me, I like using your site, but when I have a customer in my store with me, they're trying to look around the counter on my computer, and I'm got to get a sticky note or put my hand over what that price is. And it's easy to solve. We'll put a button there, click the button, and now all dealer net pricing is hidden from the site, and also hidden from my presentation here too. The new product details page, now you can see very clearly we can now show all of those images that we have available, same images that are on our consumer sites. And we have this download button there, which allows our dealers or our distributors to download a package of all of the images, all of the specs, so that they can populate that into their own ERP system or their point of sale system. One of the newest features on the site is this product showcase page. We use this one to host marketing content. So we didn't have anywhere else for this. So now we can show marketing assets, lifestyle imagery, brand logos that our dealers can download to use in their stores. We have the featured videos, which includes the Grace Vanderwall, one of our youngest artists ever signed. And we can also show featured products or products on sale. So basically it's a page we can do whatever we want with it. It's just this building blocks. We keep growing, we keep adding new features. Last image here, just fully responsive design, everything available on whatever device the user chooses. Highlight some quick results we achieved beyond just the visual improvements. So we're live now, 41 regions, 10 currencies, 8 languages, and loosely coupled to those 2 ERP systems. Hardware and purchasing has been eliminated. Site performance up a minimum 50% of every single page, some pages up over 90%. License maintenance has been reduced. We're now custom built, so we don't have to pay those ATG license fees anymore. Customer satisfaction has been phenomenal. I pulled out one here to read with you. Really starting to enjoy the new Fender portal. Some of your competitors have similar sites, but no one else has the ease of use, full product details, and accuracy like the Fender site does. It felt great being able to share that with my CEO. Order volume. Like I said, this wasn't first and foremost about driving increased orders. I want to drive increased customer satisfaction and the ability to provide services. But order volume has more than tripled from our old dealer portal. And we have 10 Lambda functions running in production, and we're paying less than $1 a month for those. So just really quick to highlight some lessons learned. For us, it was very important to start small. Start from a proof of concept or something tangible. One of the first things we developed was the products engine. So we didn't have a site or a framework or any way to access it, but we could query it, right? We had APIs for product search, for product details. We added in a serial number lookup. And then we just kept building, creating new blocks, and then we compiled them all together. And then once we had the business case approved, we were able to launch the site. It definitely came with a lot of changes to team dynamics, though. If you can imagine, if you've done this yourselves, moving to the DevOps model, you're now asking your development team to be fully responsible for the success or failure of a deployment, right? It's of their own volition. It's all on them, succeed or fail. Nobody else to blame. Some of these changes don't happen overnight. So you want to make sure you're supporting your teams, whether it's coming to a conference like reInvent or surrounding them with experts, other people who have done it. Just make sure, encourage them. A couple other quick ones, just log everything. There's an element of the accessing Lambdas via VPC where we had a little bit of a struggle with, so kind of try to avoid that if you can. Next steps for us. So like I showed you there, we're still running a lot of EC2, but we're looking to move more and more over to a serverless model. We completed our WellArchitected review with AWS. Definitely encourage everybody to do that also. So in addition to that, we're also looking at a company like Snyk to help us with some scanning of vulnerabilities. And we're working on our global online payment system with Stripe now. Last one here, just keep improving the site. Keep looking for incremental changes that make it both interesting for your users and you're showing them that you're continually invested in your mutual success with them. So this includes both internal users, for us, our internal users, our dealer users, our development team. So we're taking feedback from all of these and also looking at the data that our system's generating, going through that and looking for ways to make improvements. One last interesting one here. We're looking at we did a proof of concept, creating a couple of Alexa skills, so using our existing APIs for product lookup, serial number lookup, and product details. If you can cue that.
Alexa, look up MX178942.
Can you guys hear that at all? Okay. So Alexa says she found it. He asked for a closer look. We'll see what else is to come there. But that's all I had. I just wanted to thank you for your time. We're still continuing our journey, and I wish you the best of luck on your journeys. I think process one more slide to close.